it's a kind of communication, you know, it allows people from different cultures to communicate with each other, but it's also often a vehicle for social change. And I think that's where part of our interest lies, and also in the intrinsic, you know, how art can illuminate our inner lives and enrich our emotional world. Because we feel that, you know, when you're engaging your senses, art has that absolute unique power to widen our perception of reality and, you know, take us beyond just the everyday experience and creates this renewed sense of magic and wonder. And it can create this renewed sense of magic and wonder, you know, around nature, which is why, you know, today's talk is going to be so extremely relevant. What we want to do at Server Nature is to work with artists and collaborate with them that can provide us with these new ways to experience nature and to reimagine how we relate to it, what our relationship is. Now, one of these artists that we hugely admire is Barnaby Steel, who is the co-founder of the seminal Marshmallow Laser Feast. We've been huge fans of their work for years. They kind of work at this liminal space between art, technology, and the natural world. As an artist, Barney explores the scientific understanding as a window that allows us to look through and beyond our own experience, to understand the complexities of things that are just hidden from the naked eye. So in a way, he's making the invisible visible through the use of virtual reality. It gives me absolute huge pleasure to have him here, and thank you so much for talking about your work. And Barney will also be able to answer a few questions from all of you afterwards. You can either leave them in the chat, or, you know, we can just sort of open the mics at the end of it, and you can just ask him directly. Barney's talk is titled, Where Do You End and Begin When Sunlight is Under Your Skin? And we're all looking hugely forward to hearing it. Over to you, Barney.
Okay, so, well, thanks for your patience. I've got a presentation here, and yeah, it's kind of, I guess the source, what I've done is I've kind of collaged together a series of projects that I guess are forming the backbone of one of these threads that we keep exploring. And actually the title of the project here, Where Do You End and Begin When Sunlight is Under Your Skin, was part of a poem that we commissioned for a piece that just finished called Observations on Being. And Daisy Lafarge, who's a wonderful poet, managed to condense these interviews that we did with Merlin Sheldrake and David Abraham and lots of wonderful thinkers. We did a whole research process that was really exploring what it is to be a kind of separate individual, or the illusion of separation that comes as part of the nature of perception. You can feel like you're contained within your skin. You know, the sort of the sense data, you know, your eyeballs, it feels like it's just, I'm just behind here, just inside this skin-wrapped ecosystem. And when you look at the world through a scientific lens, you start to reveal these invisible threads, one of those being breath. And so it's really interesting to start kind of, I guess, what if you could just step out of your body, get in a rubber ring, and glide along this river of breath, or the flow of nutrients, and like where would that take you? And so we were asking these questions of, you know, through following these rivers, can you expand your sense of self by revealing these connections between you and a tree? And also just the idea that your body, I could say, if someone said, you know, where do you end and begin? I think a lot of people would maybe use the outline of their skin to define where, you know, what encapsulates them as a border between inside and outside. But if you think about what is necessary in order for you to exist in the first place, if you just follow breath, then obviously that's connecting you to trees. And so what you would call your lungs only exist in relationship to trees and photosynthesizers and the plant kingdoms that only exist in relationship to sunlight and pollinators and soil and mycelium. And so you kind of end up, as you sort of unspool, you end up revealing all of these threads, which kind of collectively, I'll touch on this later, you know, you can be considered as existence tissue. I totally rambled off there. I'm going to just start going into the thought. It was a bit off piece. So back in the day, I think it's fair to say that we were excited by everything to do with technology: lasers, drones, tracking systems, you know, light painting machines. We were kind of, I guess, embracing collaboration, stepping into the unknown, you know, discovering new techniques, and lots of experimentation and exploration. But I think maybe we got to a point in our careers where we're having children and starting to see what's happening on a planetary scale. The work kind of shifted towards how does what we do have a positive impact on people and the planet. So I guess this talk starts, there was a turning point in our careers where we basically sort of transitioned from feeling a little bit like this guy, where, you know, we're like drones, technology, lights, lasers, really kind of obsessed with what's possible, and it's quite seductive as well. You know, the exploration process and the team building and the adventure of it all. But I think a lot of us started having children, and gradually we started to think about, you know, how does the work we create, what kind of impact does that have on people and the planet, and can we use this learning, this technology, and kind of skills that we've developed as a team to start creating artworks that have a sort of a message within them. And one of the sort of pillars of this line of thought is Richard Feynman sums up so nicely here. So basically, I've got Richard on mute, and I know the story, so I can just sort of jibber jabber over the top, but a scientific understanding only ever adds to a sense of awe and wonder. And so in this story, Richard's talking about how an artist might have be painting a flower, and he'd have maybe an aesthetic sensibility that's a bit more fine-tuned to the textures and the nuances of color than a scientist. But a scientist, when they look at a flower, they see these sort of hidden levels of beauty. So for example, they understand the reason the flower is red is it's reflecting the red color spectrum. And that color red is a co-evolution with the eyeball of a pollinator that's attracted to that red. And it raises the question, does the pollinator have an aesthetic sense like a human? And then he starts talking about some of the beauty of the inner systems, the way the plant is absorbing sunlight. And so the more you understand about a flower through a scientific lens, you start to reveal these narratives that only ever add to the awe and wonder of what a flower is. And so I'm a total believer in this. I think he completely nailed it. And it's our experience as a studio that the more we collaborate with scientists, the more we learn about, I guess you could define science as the exploration of phenomenon, or an aspect of science is the exploration of phenomenon that exists beyond the limits of our perception. So we're able to design, you know, machines and instruments that can peer into dimensions of reality that exist beyond our ability to touch and see and hear. And so through that, we start to build up an image of the world that we can never experience. So it's quite interesting to think about how you can sort of translate those measurements, those, you know, CT scanners, electron microscope worldviews, you know, these different technologies, how you can bring that back into the field of human experience. And that's where the sort of virtual reality technology becomes quite interesting. One aspect to this, I put these slides in because I was thinking about how, you know, how technology, we've got this relationship of technology and how it relates to the way that we perceive the world. So up until a certain point, when anyone was painting horses, this is what they'd paint, because to the naked eye, this is what a horse looks like when it's running. And it's with the invention of the camera that you're able to create an image sequence where you can suddenly see what a horse really looks like when it's running. And probably we're so used to this kind of photography or slow motion images that if you were asked to ask people to draw a horse or to animate a horse, then this image would be the thing that probably comes up in their imagination. Whereas if they were to just rely on their eyeballs, it would look like this. So it's interesting to think how our experiences that are mediated through these technologies affect the way that we imagine and the way that we perceive the world. The same could be said of looking up at the night sky. There was a time when this black and white image was the best we could do, and now we've got Hubble space telescope photography. So, how does the imagery of Hubble affect our sense of awe and wonder when we look up at the night sky? And you can add to that and say, when you realize that the death of stars, the supernova explosions, is the furnace that creates the ingredients for life, then in a way, this image at the bottom is a sort of womb-like lens into your past. The elements that flow through us all came through this process of exploding stars. So these narratives, in my opinion, only ever add to a kind of fascination and curiosity about who we are and where we come from. Now, this little puppy, I saw this on YouTube, and it's by the Fraunhofer Institution made this, and it's a simulation of blood flow through the heart, but it's built from a sort of stop frame sequence of MRI scans. So they took actually hundreds of MRI scans of a heart, and then they sequenced them, and they got basically these kind of black and white. You get a sense of what's going on here. They're basically, from the black and white images, they could work out the speed and direction of the blood flow. So this is actually the way blood flow moves through the heart. So you can imagine trying to animate this without ever having seen this. It would be almost impossible, but there's a beauty to this and a rhythm to it that just made me think, no one's ever seen, like, we're so familiar with this rhythm, it's sort of subtly there all of the time. Even when you put your phone on your leg, it sort of wobbles slightly to this rhythm, the blood flows through your leg. But yeah, it's kind of like, whoa, we're really complicated and beautiful, and so it's like a window into our bodies in a way that we've never seen before. And even if you're a heart surgeon, you wouldn't be able to see, you'd see the muscle pumping, you wouldn't actually be able to see the flow. So I'm going to come back to that later because I've got a new project that I want to talk about, but I'm just going to touch on some of the past work in relationship to sort of perception. And with this, we have this question in the company: what happens when you take the headset off? So, how can the experience that you've had in virtual reality affect the way you experience the world afterwards? You can think of it in a way that, your past experiences, every single one of them, everything that you feed yourself with, the artworks, the books, the things you watch on TV, relationships, it's all feeding into sort of molding who you are. And so immersive experiences, I think, can do the same, and great artwork can do the same by giving you a perspective shift. And somehow you can imagine that like these glasses that you wear. So after the experience, everything that you see is slightly flavored, slightly tinted, like wearing sort of red glasses. It's slightly flavored by that experience. And so for this Eyes of the Animal, we thought, what does the world look like through the eyes of a different organism? And found this wonderful quote by Michael Pollan: looking at the world from another species' point of view is a cure for the disease of human self-importance. Love that. And so this is a little trailer. It's quite an old work. It's our sort of first site-specific piece. We went to Grisdale Forest with a LiDAR scanner and scanned a section of the forest, and we worked with scientists to understand what the world might look like through the eyes of a mosquito, a dragonfly, a frog, and an owl. And it's quite interesting to think how time and space or your perception of time is affected by sort of how close your eyeballs are to your brain. So like a dragonfly sees the world at 300 frames a second. And as an example, if you're watching a film that's playing at 25 frames a second, a dragonfly would see each frame lasting about 6 seconds equivalent. There's my dad.
What a show! What a show!
So My dad's super, oh, yeah, I love my dad. It's very encouraging, gentle man. But he's always like my guinea pig when we do these projects. And so for this piece, it was in a forest, and we had a sub pack on the back, so sort of haptic sensation of the wings of the dragonfly and the echolocation with the frog. So we started to think about using different techniques to sort of immerse the senses. And this was kind of the first time we realized that there might be something in it, because people were taking the headset off, and that one old lady who was in there, her dog was howling because the dog didn't know where she'd gone, and she was just there with the helmet on. And then, yeah, she was saying, oh, I haven't experienced anything like this since the 70s when I did all that LSD stuff. Oh. So it's like, oh, okay, we're onto something here. But also people hung around and they were looking at the local environment and pointing down into the swamp area where the frog was, and you fly up to the top of the tree. So it did kind of give them a unique perspective on that site-specific spot in the ecosystem. So then that project sort of evolved into thinking about tree time. You know, you could say that the barrier between the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom is time. It's sort of, you know, how can you accelerate time to sort of create a deeper connection to a tree as a living, breathing being? Nice quote by Dean here: the duration of the beat of a hummingbird's wing is as concealed to our sensory organs as is the drifting of the continents. So yeah, it's interesting to think, you know, how you can sort of massage time to sort of reveal different patterns of life and different systems. So we went to Sequoia National Park to LiDAR scan these crazy old, massive, I think they're about 1,600 years old, and there's we scanned quite a few of them. And then again, we were working with scientists to understand, you know, how does water travel through the root structures and make its way to the crown of the tree? And what happens if we accelerate time? You know, what would that look like? And it's interesting because if you think of the sun like a straw, so when the sun rises, there's more photosynthesis, more transpiration. And so as that water is evaporating in the canopy, it's sucking more water through the roots. And then at nighttime, everything slows right down. So it kind of created this, if you accelerate the day-night cycle to be in sync with the human breath cycle, then suddenly you're kind of creating this rhythm where you feel like the tree's breathing, but it's based on the kind of the heartbeat that's driven by the sun. And we also modeled the flow of glucose as it goes down the tree and then out through the root structures into the mycelium and into the soil. So this was our kind of first deep dive into the forest. It's a piece called Tree Hugger, and we ran out of money basically before we could do what we really wanted to do, which was use breath sensors and heart rate monitors to reveal the connection between you and the tree. We thought, you know, wouldn't it be wonderful to kind of like umbilical cords, these sort of rivers that you're dependent on for life? What would it look like if you could see that snaking out of your mouth into the tree, and then vice versa, the out breath of the tree coming towards your body? So I'm going to come on to that next, because we ran out of time and money to do it on that project. But I'd forgotten I put this slide in. Let's just see if it plays. I just wanted to show this because the scan data that we get is so this is the source scan of the tree. It's actually been processed through some software called AtomView. But it's just to say that we put a lot of effort into pushing the limits of what can be done with photogrammetry and LiDAR. But the graphics cards capabilities at the time when we made this project were a long way off being able to display this kind of quality. But part of our work is we're thinking about, you know, open sourcing the data sets and how we're kind of creating these digital doubles of old growth forests and beautiful individuals. So part of our process and our long-term vision is thinking how these digital doubles can create a value that's connected to that tree being valued as being alive and not dead. And so this is a little bit of behind the scenes of some of the inner systems. But I'll jump on. So like I said, we didn't have the time and budget to do the breath sensors, but then the opportunity came up to create a piece called Ocean of Air. And so this was basically Tree Hugger version 2. It was we'd finally solved how to do real-time fluid dynamics in virtual reality, which was a big challenge and took us a long time to nail. And so this was at the Saatchi Gallery. It was one of those moments where the houses were on the line. It's like all the chips were on the table because we did get some loans and stuff, and we did get a few sponsors. So we had a certain amount of money, but we had to self-fund a huge portion of this project. So when it went live, we were relying on ticket sales basically to pay off our loans. It was so nerve-wracking, and we all had like this Ticketmaster thing, so you could monitor how the ticket sales were going, and luckily it went really well. So it was such a relief. But I think the first month or so was quite nerve-wracking. So anyway, this piece, through the breath sensor and the heart rate monitor, you could breathe out, see the carbon dioxide leave your lips. It can roll around your hands. You can see other people within the experience, and also your body was defined by the flow of oxygen through your cardiovascular system, and that was driven by your heartbeat. It's kind of interesting that people were connecting in the virtual world as these branching beings, and then they'd take the headset off and meet for the first time as sort of flesh-coated males and females, and old people, and you don't get a sense of that in the virtual world. You don't really gender and everything become transparent. So that was interesting, because I think the work's trying to resonate on these universal levels that we're part of this kind of existence tissue. So then I'm going to touch on this. When we're doing our projects, we're always using every opportunity to try and sort of, I guess, use money from commercials or advertising to do R&D for projects we want to create in the future. And I was talking to Louis Schwartzberg, who made Fantastic Fungi, about wanting to do a virtual reality piece called The Wood Wide Web. And it's been something that we've wanted to do for years, and we're in the process of raising funding for it. But luckily, Louis came to us to do a whole load of animated sequences for the under the soil sections in Fantastic Fungi. So this is a great opportunity to do look development and R&D for what that world might look like. And a lot of this was done in partnership with Eric Ferguson, who's a freelancer that we've worked with for many years. And these ones, when you think of the soil as transparent, so you can see the root structures and the mycelium, everything connected. It's quite, it's got quite a sort of familiar but alien feeling about it. So yeah, I'll keep on cruising on. So from the forest ecosystem, we're moving into the body now. So as we were doing Ocean of Air, we tried to do the cardiovascular system. It's a bit crude. It kind of works. It's very stylized, but we started thinking, okay, so what if you could take your dog for a walk in the forest of the human body? Like, what if there was, not your dog, maybe you just go with your friends, you go for a stroll through a giant human ecosystem. So take the human body, scale it up to the size of a football pitch, and just go and explore. So this became like a big passion project, and it started off with some of these kind of look development ideas, thinking about airflow into the lungs there. It's also part of this narrative, like a human body is not a fixed thing, but a flowing event, like a flame or a whirlpool. It's, there's one thing to read that text, and another thing is to experience that. love Alan Watts, and this quote's a goodie. I think a lot of our work's influenced by some of these ideas. So we and our environment, and all of us together, are interdependent systems. Any good scientist knows that what you call the external world is as much your own body. Is as much you as your own body. Your skin doesn't actually separate you from the world. It's a bridge through which the world flows into you and you flow into the world. Nailed it. Alan, nailed it. This book I really recommend. David Hinton. Oh, it's a masterpiece. It's not a massive book, but he's basically using a Chinese landscape painting as a metaphor for existence. And within the book, he's comes up with this term existence tissue. And I just think that's a beautiful way of thinking, when trying to describe the kind of threads that bond all living things, to think of it like tissue that's connected. I find that a really beautiful metaphor that's kind of covering everything, encompasses everything, the material world. So then I'm nearing the end now. I'm just going to go into this final project. So working with the Fraunhofer Institute, we emailed them about that beautiful heart visualization they did, and then they were up for doing a collaboration. So I went there and we CT scanned my body. And that was kind of useful as a reference. They actually, in the end, sent us much higher resolution data and MRI scans. Actually, sorry, we fMRI'd my body, not CT. CT is the one that's, you only get CT if you're really ill because it's got radiation. So this is a bit of a behind the scenes. We basically started modeling the human cardiovascular system in crazy detail. So there's points, there's a point at which the highest resolution medical data we can get our hands on ends, and then we're using, we've got these papers that we also use for doing medical research and diagnosis that talk about how the branching structures of a lung work. So we use those formulas to create these branching networks within Houdini. And so over time, we've got our lungs built. Here is the nasal passages and mouth. So we wanted to show the flow of air through, the nostril and mouth as it spirals down the throat into the lungs. So here you can see there's some sort of tests with the fluid dynamics and those structures. This one's quite nice. So when you look inside the head transparent, that's like the kind of inverse mold of air rolling down your throat. And so, yeah, this project, I don't want to stay too long, so I just want to show you the actual piece that we made. But there's a combination of lots of different scanning technologies, and it's a work in progress. And sort of, to that Alan Watts quote, it's the backbone of this is that you're not static, you're in a constant state of change. And that's a great way to sort of realize that you exist in relationship, because you've got this constant feeding nutrients and water and air that are sustaining you. So that was an exploration we were doing in Houdini. A lot of our work is sort of R&D, working towards these almost impossible goals. And we tend to work from photorealism and 3D rendering into real-time systems. So this was, thinking about blood. When your heart pumps, your blood's moving at 3 seconds when it comes out of your heart. It takes about a minute to do a lap of your whole body. It takes about 3 seconds to reach your fingertip. So, it's quite a thing that's going on just under the surface. Now, this piece here was a commercial that we did. So we were posting some of these projects on Instagram, and we had the opportunity to do a commercial that was designed to sell vitamins, which was about the human body as an ecosystem. So it's kind of a good example of where the artwork we're creating kind of creates a feedback loop, and then we get commercial clients asking us to explore certain themes. This sequence here is thinking about the similarities between the world out there, sort of nature out there, and nature inside, and a great opportunity to explore the human ecosystem. In fact, this shot here was my favorite because the oxygen's feeding every single cell in your body, trillions of cells. So it's interesting to think of it like fog moving over the Yorkshire moors, you know, as it's sort of that last stage from capillaries into skin cells was quite a thing to imagine. So I'm just going to wind it up here. I want to get on to the last few moments. So with a lot of our work, we're sort of constantly iterating around these ideas of, you know, the existence tissue and looking at different ecosystems and different perception. And we were super chuffed to exhibit this piece as part of Observations on Being. And so this is a little documentary of how that human ecosystem was displayed for this exhibition. And so each screen is like a window into the body, and it's tracking your head position. So just like a real window, as you move your head, the perspective changes. And also your distance from the screen was able to push through the 3D volumes so you can peer into inner structures, like a clipping plane. And this piece is called The Tides Within Us. So I've got about three minutes left, because I'm also conscious of time, having kept you waiting at the start. So then Terence McKenna, he's always there in the background, and he's got this one, I mean, he nails it here. Nature's not our enemy to be raped and conquered. Nature is ourselves to be cherished and explored.
Where do you draw a line around your body? Is it possible to say where you end and begin? Through the senses, we are threaded into this entanglement with everything around us. All you need to do is follow the current.
Cool. So that's that concludes my presentation. That trailer was just the trailer that we used for the Observations on Being piece that was in Coventry as part of the City of Culture, but it's closed now, unfortunately. But yeah, thanks. I'm up for some questions. Let me just stop sharing here.
Thank you so much, Barney. This was amazing. Round of applause from everyone.
Thank you.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. Yes, I mean, you know, conscious of everyone's time, but I mean, I would love for people to have the opportunity to ask us some questions. So if there are any questions, just raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask away.
Hi, I'm Geneviève. I'm currently based in Cape Town, but sort of co-creating in with Odyssey and SNI and everybody who's willing to be in the Momentiverse, and was wondering if co-creation with this type of technology and with the kind of projects that you're doing is something that Marshmallow would be interested in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
awesome.
yeah, our team isn't that big actually, and most of our projects at the beginning in the research phase, we're like, you know, we spend ages kind of reaching out to scientists and, you know, different kind of experts, fluid dynamic experts, and all these people, and they kind of feed into the team. And so we're open for all possibilities and conversations. I think it's the way we like to work, collaborating. So yeah, that'd be cool. We could have a chat.
I had a, thanks so much, Barney. I had a quick question. I was intrigued by your question. What happens when you take off the headset, and how people engaged and responded with the Saatchi Gallery piece afterwards? What sort of follow-up did you do with them? Did you?
There's a few threads. We had some, yeah, we had some really good feedback. We did a survey for Ocean of Air, and then we went back to a selection of people to ask them a few months later. You know, sort of, there was a whole checklist. I can't remember all the details, but we sort of did it in quite a systematic way. And I think in general, people found that they found it like very emotional and engaging. And I think one of the core tick boxes was empathy for a tree. So, I mean, we're so familiar with trees, but you know, not everyone can really open. Maybe it's easy for everybody unless they're going out and spending more time in forests or meditating, or they've got a sensitivity that maybe this sort of technological experience is a way to open up or facilitate a kind of intimate engagement with this sort of digital version of a tree. There's some strange aspects to what we're doing as well, because, you know, it's all like, you know, is all of this technology really the way ahead for connecting to nature? But I think in some respects, you know, you can look at sort of David Attenborough and all of the nature documentaries. You know, imagine never seeing any nature documentary. You wouldn't know what how a snow leopard moved, or penguins. You know, that there's so much of our experience of the natural world is already mediated through technology, and one of the qualities that virtual reality has is it gives you a sense of presence. But also, if you're standing in front of that tree, you wouldn't be able to step inside it and journey to the canopy. And there's elements to the technology that allow you to, you know, offer up a sort of simulation or a sort of poetic interpretation of phenomenon that sort of do exist. So it's kind of, you know, in an increasingly urbanized sort of culture, you know, many people born in cities, I think as the technology, immersive technology evolves, there'll come a time, you know, when it's as prolific as mobile phones, and that these experiences that connect you to real places and endangered ecosystems will be a powerful way for people to create emotional connections to, you know, forests and the more than human world. So at the moment, where, you know, a lot of the reasons that it exists as an exhibition is the way that things are funded, and the people paying for it want to do a show. But ultimately, we create virtual worlds, and those worlds, although they're in an art gallery at the moment, I imagine in the future you'll be able to access them through your home or through the gallery spaces. And so our long-term vision is essentially sort of digital doubles of real places, and that they should be living, breathing sort of systems that are connected to the real place.
I wanted to know that from your experience thus far, have you, because I've done a lot of research into this, it's awesome. Have you found that indeed people are able to draw connections that they otherwise definitely wouldn't otherwise be able to imagine? And do you think it's viable in this case to use that to avoid waste and silos. So to be able to, you know, if you can make better connections, you can sort of make better economies and ecologies so as to avoid waste and thus silos. Can you see that happening through this, in this way?
Yeah, I'm sure that there's, so if you think of, like where I can see this heading in terms of the work we're doing on the ecosystems is that once you've, at the moment we're doing sort of fragments of the ecosystem, like the journey of water from root to crown, or photosynthesis, or the wood wide web, and or like different organisms' perception. So there's sort of like little mini narratives, but when you get to the point where those things all exist within one virtual world, then you can kind of imagine an experience where you can start to better understand the interconnectedness of all these things. So your concept of a tree or a plant, it breaks down, I guess, the way that language puts labels on things. It sort of, what's the word? It's sort of like dissolves these boundaries. So you start to see the whole thing as this super organism that's interconnected, and as those threads interrelate. And that gets more and more powerful the more threads that you reveal. So in that sense, you know, the human bodies, if you really go to town on it, you're a super organism, and like everything that you would classify as the full possibility of your experience and perception is only a fraction of what's going on in your body. Because when you start to dive inside, there's, you know, white blood cells, red blood cells, all the bacteria, there's so much stuff going on. And so if that's going on in your own body, then where does your little pizza slice of perception sit within the body of the earth? You start to, like, you know, this idea of you starts to get a bit wobbly. And I think that's a really healthy thing, because if we can, maybe one of the hopes would be that if you could expand your sense of self, you know, beyond the boundaries of your body, like not as a theory, but as a kind of experience, then obviously psychedelics are really good at that. But this is like sneaking magic mushrooms into the school omelette, as in it's like a education-based scientific, like rooted in science education, but actually what you're experiencing is the dissolving of boundaries between things. Yeah, it's got loads of potential. We're just at the start, I think. Hopefully it's going to, we can sort of expand what we're doing into more ambitious projects.
I do want, I mean, maybe it just really follows on from what Barney has been saying until now. I really like the way you are describing this, Barney. I think you have an incredible humility in the way you approach this, which comes across in every choice of word that you use, which I think is really, really wonderful. And I would just be curious to hear a little bit from your experience. What are the boundaries that come with doing the work in the way that you do it? So I think that now we have been talking a lot about trying to dissolve the limitations, trying to get a different sense, trying to see the limitations that we had in language. You spoke a little bit about David Attenborough and nature documentary, yet a very particular way of getting at this. And I think that the way that you are trying is super fascinating and very beautiful. And I'm just curious to hear from you what you experience when trying to make these translations or intermediations, or however you might call that, when you try to show flows and this immensity. So in a sense, the excess of the real, always when you try to get at it in a different way, in the ways that you are doing, what would be the limitations that you run into? Where are the things that cause you trouble when you work with VR, when you work with augmented reality? Where are the points of frustration when you try to do that?
That's a good question. I think there's definitely one aspect to it is that there's a beauty that comes through the 3D scanning and image making techniques that, you know, electron microscopes, CT scanners all of these different technologies that you can combine in to create the kind of set of that virtual world. Like the more attention you put into trying to push the limits of those technologies, then you find when you go in there, it's jaw-dropping from the beginning. Whereas if you were to try and invent that stuff, you lose an element of beauty and complexity that you would struggle to invent. So that's definitely been part of my experience. But then, there's another element, which is those scanning technologies give you like a static geometry, but then we're visualizing everything in motion. So then fluid dynamics is at the backbone of that. And, you know, whether you're looking at breath or blood flow, it's all based on the movement of fluid. And then there's, those things were like big challenges at the start, but all of this technology is racing forwards. So the ability to kind of, I guess, peer deeper and make more convincing simulations, that's getting, the ability to do that's getting better and better. But there is also like a big dimension to this, which is, you know, at a point which the data sets end, there's an artistic interpretation and a kind of poetry to it, because it isn't the real thing. And I think that the reason that we're using point clouds is that it gives you a sort of a dreamlike impression of something without trying to be the thing. And so, and sometimes when you just try and represent it in its full realism, there's a kind of disconnect, because your brain, part of your brain's going, it's trying too hard to be real, and I know it's not real. So you have this kind of weird disconnect from it. But when it's more dreamlike, then somehow you accept it as a sort of something familiar but alien. And so yeah, we're very much looking for the sort of poetry through the visuals and how these things connect. I think also it's interesting to think about the limits of language with this kind of work, because I was in a desert in Israel. I was showing this. I was using power from this Bedouin tribe, and I was setting it all up. And the musician came over and was like, "What are you doing?" And I started going into the technology, and he went like this. He went, "Shh," and he put his finger on my lips, like actually touched my lips. And then he said, "Tell me, what does an apple taste like?" And you can't answer that question. It's like, how do you describe what an apple tastes like with words? So that the sensation of eating an apple is such a million miles away from the richness of the sensation. It made me think, even though virtual reality isn't sort of simulating taste or anything like this, but the trajectory of this technology is that it's kind of hacking perception and the senses in a way that you can sort of convince the brain of certain things. So it's interesting to think about the limits of language as used to describe a phenomenon, especially when it comes to science, because the deeper you dive, the more the language gets, you know, the labels attached to things gets more and more specific. So you end up with like photosynthesis is like thylakoid membranes, and it all gets like super technical. But then you could show photosynthesis as a super refined, beautiful sort of fluid simulation, the mechanics of it, and you might come out with a deeper understanding of what it is and an intuition that would be like almost impossible to articulate with language and formulas. So kind of interested in that space where you know, the experience of the phenomenon and that something gets carried through with that. That's hard to define. I'd say that's at the heart of the artwork, is the scientific observation and the beauty that just translates through that.
First of all, amazing. Your work is amazing, and I'm totally unfamiliar, but I'm really happy that I showed up today. I'm not sure whether I'm going to ask a question or provide a comment, but I just have a strong urge to share. I'm latching on to this idea that you've been mentioning more than once now, that science can be used as a means to, you know, explore what's hidden and go deeper. And you mentioned that strikes in a lot of times wonder and awe. But I think that that's not necessarily a given. I think I come from a background, I'm coming from the world of science. And I think when there's this motivation to go deeper, you know, you reach this why, where you can have this, like, you have this sense of something, and you can use that sense to generate wonder and awe, but you can also deviate into the world of like control and manipulability, manipulating this thing. And so I would I want to see the work that you're doing actually seep back in to the world of science as a way to reframe what it means to actually look at what's hidden. And I'm not sure if you're doing that already, but I think there's huge potential, because a lot of the world of science doesn't necessarily like see things as processes, see things as opportunities to heighten wonder and awe, but I think there's like huge potential there. So I don't know if you want to speak on that or anything, but amazing work, yeah.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, definitely. Because we're talking to a lot of scientists when we're making the work, and at the moment with the Fraunhofer Institute, we're looking at how the sort of the human ecosystem project, we're planning to keep adding more layers of detail, and then we're looking for funding basically to do a sort of education adaptation of the body, and so that's something that we've never done before, because often the funding that we're getting is purely focused on the artwork, and often we don't have like the kind of budgets to then properly engage with education. But as a longer term goal for the company, we really want to sort of find the right partners to explore that stuff, and can see that it could be a powerful way to learn, this sort of embodied learning, and also just for scientific, as a tool within the science community. So yeah, definitely open to all that.
Amazing. I think we have time for one last question from Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you, Barney. It was magnificent, and it wraps up a great day for me. I had a chance to speak to Tim Rademacher this afternoon. I don't know if you've heard of him or know him. He's a postdoc in vegetation simulation dynamics, and he did. He's really interested in the physiology of trees. He did a project at Harvard Forest called the Witness Tree Project, where he had sensors installed in trees, and they're essentially capturing micrometeorological measurements and tree-specific measurements like sap flow and the growth of trees. And the data that it's pulling from these sensors instigates prefabricated languages in the form of tweets. They're already like in a Google spreadsheet, and they basically get activated by the condition in the code. And so it's really, really cool project, and he's looking to share this with schools and really bring this kind of open source technology to larger swaths of the population. I just thought it was fantastic, because he was saying, you know, if you want to engage with us, you need a tree physiologist and a tech expert to engage. And it's the first time that I've heard those two things in one realm. So that, you know, the aspect of nature and going deep into science, plus the technology that you're obviously working with, and we at SNI hope to work on as well in future. It's this beautiful meshing of two worlds and two complexities. So I really enjoyed your speech and the presentation. Very grateful that you took so much time for us.
I appreciate that. I'll definitely look up the Witness Tree. That sounds like someone we need to talk to.
Yeah, because he was also talking about the expansion of trees. He actually said that trees expand almost every day. They almost bloat because they take in water, and then they shrink again every morning. So it was a new fact I found out today.
Amazing.
Right.
All right. Well, once again, Barney, thank you so much for taking the time. It was just everything I hoped for and more, and it was really, really beautiful. Thank you.
Well, pleasure. And yeah, thanks for inviting us and looking forward to, yeah, coming up with some cunning plans. I guess to end on, like, there's this whole, we're just trying to figure out how the work we're doing can, how it can be sort of service to the beautiful individuals we're sort of 3D scanning, and, you know, how can we create, you know, either through NFTs or just thinking basically how a tree can be worth more alive than dead, specifically with a focus on old growth forests. So that's kind of a challenge that we're really talking a lot about in the studio. I know Florian, we're going to have a chat about it, but
exactly.
Yeah, yeah, obviously we're open to collaboration. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for staying on so long and joining us here.